All right, can everybody see a copy of my, the copy of the slides on the screen? Billy, okay, good, I can see Billy. So Billy gave me a thumbs up, so I'm guessing everybody can see it. So, all right, well, thank you everyone so much for joining us today. This is our CSP Grant 2425 Subchapter C webinar. So we're happy to have everyone here with us today. Starting off with some of our grant contacts, I'm Charlotte Nickelber. I am the Charter School Programs Grant Manager. We also have Nathaniel Johnson. He's on the line as well. He's our Charter School Programs Grant Specialist. We have Charlotte Wehrman. She is our Grants Manager on the Grants Administration Division. So if you have any technical kind of questions about grants management in particular, she'll be your girl. And then Carmen Patrick is our Grant Negotiator, and she is the one who handles all of our negotiation process after our grant awards take place, and also after anytime you have a negotiation, it'll be Carmen that handles that negotiation process. So looking at our agenda for today, we're going to talk about the program purpose of the CSP grant. We're going to look at the grant overview. We're going to walk through the application itself. So we will go through each part of the application and what you need to complete for submitting that application. We're going to talk about budget and use of funds, including the planning and implementation activities, allowable activities and unallowable activities. We're going to talk about the scoring process, the review criteria, and how priority points are awarded, and then next steps for the grant application process. So starting off with our authority and the program purpose. So the Texas CSP grant is allowed through ESSA for Public Law 11495 through our ESSA Act. It is the Texas Quality Charter Schools Program Grant. It's awarded to us by USDE, and it's allowed through statute for as part of our Texas Education Code, Chapter 12. Subchapter C, D, and E. This is particular for Subchapter C, and our Texas Administration Code as part of Chapter 100. So just to give you a little background about our Charter School Programs Grant, USDE awarded us $100 million. This was given to us or awarded to us in 2020. The grant period runs from October 1st of 2020 through September 30th of 2025. TEA, as part of this grant award, we award grants of up to $900,000 to our LEAs as sub-grantees to open and prepare new charter schools or replicate and expand high-quality charter schools. So each grant award, we award up to 20 each year. In this cycle, we're awarding up to 10. We plan to have another cycle in the future, but each grant award is up to $900,000. So the purpose of our Texas Charter School Program, Charter Schools Program Grant, is to grow high-quality charter schools in Texas, especially those that are focused on improving academic outcomes for our economically disadvantaged students. So this is the overall purpose of the Charter School Program Grant from USDE. So keeping that in mind as you're coming up with your goals or planning your activities, that we really want to focus on improving the academic outcomes for our educationally disadvantaged students. So now looking at our overview, we're going to move into that. I just want to make sure and check my waiting room. Okay, perfect. So just to give you an overview of our grant, in this cycle, we are planning to award approximately 10 grant awards. We have $9 million available for this cycle. So that's up to $900,000 per award. So we have 10 grants that we can award potentially in this cycle. The beginning of this project period will be April 1st of 2024, and the ending date will be September 30th of 2024. So all expenditures will have to take place in between those two time periods. So the grant start date will be April 1st of 2024, and then September 30th of 2025, excuse me, I believe I said 2024 earlier, 2025 will be the ending date for this grant project. In order to be eligible for this grant, you must meet the following criteria. So you must meet the federal definition of a charter school. You will find that as attachment 1 on the grants opportunity page. So it has in there all the details of what you have to meet in order to meet the federal definition of a charter school. You must, as a campus, never have received CSP funds under ESSA. And you must meet the requirements that are outlined in Chapter 12, Subchapter C, for meeting the definition of a Subchapter C district authorized charter school. Additional eligibility requirements for this particular grant cycle, and these can also be found all in your program guidelines, which are on our TEA grants opportunity page. In order to be eligible for this grant, you must be a campus charter school that's authorized by the local board of trustees, pursuant to our Texas Education Code, Chapter 12, Subchapter C, on or before January 2nd of 2024. So that doesn't mean that the campus has to open before then. It just means that the local board of trustees has to authorize and say, we're going to authorize this campus to become a charter school on or before January 22nd of 2024. They have to be authorized as a new charter school or as a charter school that is designed to replicate a new charter, a existing high quality charter school campus. And it has to be based on the educational model of an existing high quality charter school campus and submit all the required documentation as stated in the RFA. And additionally, the charter campus must open prior to Wednesday of September 3rd of 2025. So it has to be authorized to open by the local board of trustees before January 22nd of 2024. The charter has to actually open and begin serving students as a charter campus prior to Wednesday, September 3rd of 2025. And again, if you have any questions as we're going through, you can feel free to pop those into the chat. Nate's going to be monitoring the chat for us. So if you have any questions, just feel free to pop those in and we'll get to those throughout the webinar. So as I mentioned before, one of the things that you have to meet is the federal definition of a public charter school. This is part of our attachments that have to be submitted as part of the RFA. This is actually attachment 1, so you will have to acknowledge that you're going to meet all of these criteria. So I'm just going to pause. I'm not going to read these to you, but I'm going to give you a minute to look at the federal definition of a charter school. This is the first section, and then we have another section that continues with our federal definition. One of the things I just want to highlight on this side is our C, where it operates and pursuant with a specific set of educational objectives determined by the school's developer and agreed to by the authorized public chartering agency. This is part of your district charter agreement. So you will submit this also as part of the RFA. So really focusing in on your district charter agreement, you will submit that as part of your application package. Additionally, there are more parts to the federal definition. So again, I'm going to pause for a minute and let you read over these before we move into our application information. Sorry, I'm not sure what happened with my mouse. It went crazy. So again, just to reiterate, you must continue to meet this federal definition throughout the course of the grant in order to be eligible to continue to receive funding. We do send out budget reminders to our grantees each month, and we include this federal definition. So it's just something to keep in mind that you must continue to meet this federal definition throughout the course of the grant. And Nate, I think I saw a question in the chat. Was there a question?
Yes, I was typing out a response, but if you would like to respond verbally, I can delete what I'm
nope, that's fine. I just saw the pop up and I can't see the chat because I have it in presenter mode. So I was just double checking. All right, so now we're going to look at our application information. We're actually going to walk through each part of the application itself, application part 1. So we will walk through each part of that to discuss each part of the application and what you need in order to complete this application. So our application posted on December 8th of 2023. We will host 2 application office hours where these are optional office hours where you can attend and we will provide support for the application process. Those will be held on January 9th at 10:30 a.m. and then again at January 11th at 2:30 p.m. We will share the links for those at the end of our presentation today. And you can also find those in the program guidelines. The application is going to be due on January 2nd of 2024. The grant start date, as I said before, will be April 1st of 2024. That's when you can begin incurring expenses to be reimbursed by the CSP grant. And then the grant end date will be September 30th of 2025. So for our grant processes, first thing you'll need to do is complete your CSP grant application. The TEA staff then determines the eligibility of applicants, making sure that you meet all of those eligibility requirements. Eligible applicants are then scored by external evaluators. These are external evaluators that we've hired and trained on the scoring process. So all applications are scored by these external evaluators. Applications that meet the cut score are then evaluated to determine if priority points have been earned. Negotiations then take place between TEA and the applicant, and once negotiations are completed, the grantee will receive their NOGA of grant awards and can begin drawing down funds. So some different dates to keep in mind. So the grant start date, that is the date that the LEA can start incurring costs related to the grant. The NOGA date, that's the date that the NOGA is actually approved and the LEA can start entering expenditures for reimbursement. And then your grant end date. So this is the date by which all the funds must be expended and all items and services purchased with grant funds must be utilized. So you have to use the things that you purchased within the grant, the program period. So between the grant start date and the grant end date. We're going to host a grant management session. So we'll talk more about like entering expenditures for reimbursement and those kinds of things at a later date. So one thing I really want to highlight here is that our CSP grant is a reimbursement grant. So funds are not front loaded to the grantee. They don't go into a checking account for you to begin using. What will happen is grantees will incur the expenses as they're outlined in their approved grant application. Then you will submit a payment request through our expenditure reporting system. And once that request is approved, those invoices and things have been evaluated, you will receive reimbursement for the expenses that were incurred. So it's not a front-loaded grant, it is a reimbursement grant. So I just want to make sure that I name that for everyone.
Charlotte, we had a question come into the chat that I wanted to elevate to you. They ask, we have an existing charter school that we would like to redesign to become a dual language campus. Will we be able to qualify and apply for this grant?
Is it a subchapter D school or is it a subchapter or a C school?
I'll get that clarification from them.
Okay. All right, so taking a look at our subchapter C application. So now we're going to take time we're going to walk through each piece of the application. The first page on the application is your information, but diving into the actual content of our application, our first step is to list and identify needs. So you're going to list 3 quantifiable needs as addressed in your needs assessment that the CSP grant will address. So you're going to first name what is the need for your district. So what is this campus? You've seen this need in your district that this campus is going to address. And then what is your plan for addressing that need? So for each need that you name, you need to then describe your plan for addressing that particular need. So for example, here, ABC Charter School, they've determined, looking at their 5 surrounding districts and their district themselves, that their economically disadvantaged students in the district are scoring at least 15 points lower on the national and state test for reading ELA. So they're seeing that there is a need to address learning and reading for our economically disadvantaged students. So when they're looking at their plan for addressing that need, they want to make sure that they are first determining what they're going to address, which is their reading program, and how that reading program is going to help to support those economically disadvantaged students. So if you see here, it says our rigorous reading program has been proven to close the economically disadvantaged gaps for economically disadvantaged students. They currently serve a 97% ACO-DIS, and they have had success with this program. They provide training for their teachers, and they have an intensive reading intervention schedule that they provide for those students, and they have seen success with that. So they've not only named the need, but then they've named their plan for addressing that need. So if I take a look at this, just some of the things that they've named, just pulling those out, they've named the data that they use to identify that need. They named the student group that was identified as having the need, and they named the gap that was identified when they're looking at the data. Then when developing their plan for addressing that need, they stated what would be used to close the specific gap. Then they stated why that plan was chosen. So they named their proven past success. And then they provided details about the plan. So they've included not only their quantifiable needs, but also their plan for addressing those specific needs. So when you're developing your quantifiable needs parts and your plan for addressing your needs, you'll need to make sure that you include both of those components. The next section of the application focuses in on SMART goals. So you're going to describe a summative SMART goal that you will identify that where you want to be at the end of your grant. And the SMART goal needs to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. And it needs to be related to student outcomes. And again, coming back to that purpose of our CSP grant, which is to improve academic outcomes for our educationally disadvantaged students. So your summative SMART goal is where you want to be at the end of the grant. Remember, our grant ends September of 2025. You'll also have in there quarterly benchmarks that you're going to use to determine progress toward your goal throughout the duration of your grant. So when developing your SMART goal, you want to make sure that you include it in this format. So by specific date, which will be September of 2025, how much percent of a student group or all students will achieve? What do you want them to achieve on a specific assessment? So in writing, again, you want it to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. All right, so taking a look at an example versus a non-example of our SMART goals. So in spring of 2025, 80% of all students who are assessed will have achieved acceptable performance on the reading ELA examinations that are part of the State of Texas Assessment of Academic Readiness, so our STAR test. So they've included in there when they're going to achieve that in 2025, how many students we have in there, what we want them to achieve, acceptable performance on what examination. So we've included all of that information in there as opposed to our non-example. So non-example, by January of 2024, students in grades 3 through 5 will be reading on or above grade level. So it's not summative, talking about January of 2024. That's even before our grant starts. I didn't update these dates, unfortunately, so it's not summative. Does not include the percentage of students, so we don't know how many students we want to see achieving at this level, so it's not measurable. And it does not include a specific assessment that will be used, so we don't know what they're going to be using. We just say reading on or above grade level, but we have no way of knowing how that's going to be measured or how many students we want to see at that level. So when developing your SMART goals, things to keep in mind is our overall purpose of our CSP grant. So our overall purpose, again, is to improve the academic outcomes for educationally disadvantaged students and increase the number of A and B rated charter campuses in Texas. So when developing your SMART goals, think through where you want your campus to be in order to help us meet those overall purposes of the CSP grant. So now taking a look at our implementation SMART goals. So this is new to our application this year. In addition to our student outcome summative SMART goal, we want to set goals for our implementation of the CSP grant. So these are going to be related to things you're actually doing in the implementation for your grant. So you're going to describe 3 to 5 SMART goals for things that you want to achieve with the grant. It could be you want to provide training to all of your teachers or to a specific set of teachers, or you want to make sure that you're putting a particular culture program in place. So what are things that you want to achieve with the grant that aren't necessarily just focused on student outcomes, but are things that you want to achieve as you're implementing the activities from the grant? You'll also include in that chart, you'll have a chart that has the actual implementation goal and then the progress measure you're going to use to determine that goal. So what are you going to do to measure that you are actually implementing the activities from your grant goal? As I mentioned before, you will set also benchmarks that will measure your progress toward your student outcome goal. So you will set a benchmark of what you're going to do and where you want to be in each one as you move towards your summative goal. So thinking through where I want to be in the first quarter benchmark, where I want to be in the second quarter benchmark, and where I want to be in the third quarter benchmark to help me get to my summative goal. So one tip for this is to backwards plan from your summative goal. If your summative goal says that you want 85% of students to achieve approaches or higher on the mathematics test, then where do I need to be in quarter 1 to get there? Where do I need to be in quarter 2? And where do I need to be in quarter 3 in order to get me to that 85% by the end of the grant period? So really thinking through how you're going to measure progress in each of the benchmarks, and then where you want the achievement level to be in order for you to get to your overall goal. So I'm going to pause right there for just a minute about the SMART goals. I know that was a lot of me talking. So looking at our SMART goals, both the student outcome goals and then our implementation goals and benchmarks. Are there any questions that you have about the SMART goal pieces? Right. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat. And if we can't answer your question right now while we're on in the session, we will be happy to get back with you. And we will also be doing an FAQ document that we will be putting questions in there that we have received from other charter applicants or other grantees. The next part after your SMART goals of the grant application is the project evaluation and modification. So there's going to be a narrative section where we're going to ask you to describe how you're going to use project evaluation data to determine when and how to modify your program. So if you're not meeting the goals, what data are you going to use to then modify your program so that you are able to meet your goals? So we want to know how you're going to use that data, and then how you're going to make decisions about when to modify your data. So you will include that in this narrative for this question. The next part of our grant application is a checklist. So on this part, you're going to accept all of these program assurances. This is for all applicants. So these are things that are related to our supplement supplant, FERPA, the statutory requirements, the ESSA provisions and assurances, our electronic information resources, financial accountability systems, reporting and evaluation requirements, certificates of occupancy, that attachment 1, federal definition of a charter school, the program assurances for open enrollment charters, and then program assurances for our district authorized charters. And so you will need to read through those carefully. Some of those will be in the program guidelines, others will be present in the application, but you need to make sure that you read through our statutory requirements and program assurances carefully, and that you're agreeing to each one of those as you as part of applying for this grant. One thing I want to note, going back to that last assurance there, talking about working with a CMO or an IMO, one thing I want to note that if a Subchapter C school is working with a charter management organization, one thing to keep in mind is that the local charter board cannot cede power to the CMO's board, but the local charter board must be the one involved in making the decision. So that's something I just want to highlight for everyone, that if you are working with a charter organization that has a CMO, that the local charter board has to be the one making those decisions. The next section of the application goes back to our narrative form. So not just the checklist anymore. Now it's going to be written responses in the grant application. So the first question is going to ask to describe the roles and responsibilities of the applicant, the partner organization, the charter management organization, including administrative and contractor roles and responsibilities of the partner. So what's going to be the roles and responsibilities of our district? What's going to be the roles and responsibilities of the charter partner, the roles and responsibilities of those on campus. So thinking through what that's going to be, what that's going to look like, and describing those on number 1. Number 2 focuses in on quality controls. So what did you agree between the district and the authorizing organization and TEA, how schools' performance in the state's accountability system will impact student achievement and will be one of the most important factors. So thinking through your quality controls of how you're going to regulate your charter campus and how that relates to your accountability within the state of Texas. Number 3, describing how the autonomy and flexibility is going to be granted to the charter school campus. So as a district charter or Subchapter C charter, describe how the autonomy is going to go above and beyond the flexibility and autonomy that is afforded to traditional campuses within the school district. So as part of that federal definition of a charter schools are granted that autonomy over budget, operations, personnel decisions. So describing in detail how the district is going to allow for the charter campus within the district to have that autonomy. Question number 4 is asking about the planned academic program and how it's going to support improved academic outcomes for educationally disadvantaged students. So here you want to describe your academic program that you're going to implement at that campus and describing how it's going to improve the academic outcomes for those educationally disadvantaged students. Again, tying back to that main purpose of our CSP grant. Question 5 wants to know how you're going to solicit and consider input from parents and other members of the community on the implementation and operation of the proposed charter school. So after you've opened up the school, you've gotten that input from parents. How did you get that input from parents? And how are you going to continue to solicit that input from parents as the charter school is operating? Number 6 is describing the eligible applicants' plans for ongoing effective parent and community engagement. This is something that is a part of those CSP statutes that were written when they were implementing this grant, is that ongoing effective parent and community engagement. So describing your plans for how you're going to continue that effective parent and community engagement once the campus opens. Number 7, ask for describing the eligible applicants' plans for meeting the transportation needs of the students at the proposed charter campus. So how are you going to provide transportation for those students? This is especially important for students that have IEPs that require transportation. So make sure that even if you're not planning to provide transportation for students on the campus, that you do have a plan in place for how you would provide transportation for students who have IEPs. 8, A, B, and C. So these are asking for descriptions of how you're going to leverage your grant funds. So the first question is asking about the activities that you're going to use during the planning activities. So how are you going to use grant funds to implement planning activities? 8B is asking for how you're going to use funds for implementation activities. And then 8C is describing how you're going to maintain financial sustainability after the end of the grant period. So how do you continue with your charter program after the grant has ended? Number 9 is going to ask you to justify any requests for waivers or any federal statutory or regulatory provisions. If you are not asking for waivers, then you don't have to put anything here. This is just a justification. If you are going to be requesting any waivers, you'll need to put the justification for requesting those waivers in this box on number 9. Question number 10, this is for our Sub-C applicants, which is everyone that will be applying for this grant because it's a Sub-C only grant cycle. So you're going to describe the educational program of your proposed charter school. Make sure you're including how you're going to enable all students to meet the state academic achievement standards, the grade levels and ages of the students that will be served on the campus, and the curriculum and instructional practices that will be used. So here we want to know all about the educational program that's going to be happening on your Subchapter C campus, on that charter campus. So really telling us, spelling out how you're going to ensure that all students are meeting the state achievement standards, who's going to be serving, and the curriculum and instructional practices that you're going to use. Next, you're going to describe how the district authorizer is going to monitor the campus to make sure that all students, including those students with disabilities and English language learners, are being recruited, enrolled, and retained, and that their needs are being met. So now we're getting a little deeper into how you're going to monitor that our special population students that their needs are being met and they are actually being enrolled on those campuses. They're not being excluded or not being non-retained on the campus because their needs aren't being met. So we really want to know, how is the district going to monitor how we're meeting the needs of our special population students? The next one asks about the manner in which an annual independent financial audit will be conducted. So the campus charter will have to have a plan in place that they will conduct an audit that is separate and apart from the district's annual financial audit. So the district has to do their own annual financial audit, but the campus charter will have to have a separate financial audit. So what will that separate financial audit look like, that annual independent financial audit look like for this particular campus? Question 13 wants to describe the manner in which the campus will provide necessary information to the school district for information regarding PEIMS. So how are you going to implement PEIMS on the campus so that the district's getting that information, they can report back to us via our PEIMS system? And the last question is asking how the district plans to flow federal and state funds to the proposed charter campus, describing the timeline for flowing these funds to the campus that will ensure students are promptly receiving the benefits of the service, and that appropriate federal and state funds can provide. So making sure that the campus is still receiving the appropriate federal and state funds for that proposed campus, and we're not diverting those away from them because they have the grant or because they are a charter campus. So still making sure that they're receiving the appropriate funds. Our next, this is page 10 in our application, and this is our TEA program requirements. So we want to know the projected population that's going to be served in 23-24. Same, the population that's going to be served in 24-25. It is broken down by grade level, so we want to know approximately how many students you foresee in each grade level for that particular campus. The projected number of students who would attend an F-rated campus in 23-24. The name and CDCNs of the F-rated campus that those students would potentially attend if they were not to attend this new charter campus in 23-24. And then if the campus will be located in a qualified opportunity zone. We also have a question related to the lottery. So if more students apply, then the campus is able to accommodate. We want you to describe your lottery procedures to admit students. This is part of that federal definition of a charter school. In order to meet that federal definition, campuses must use a lottery to admit students. If more students than they can accommodate apply. So just to talk a little bit about some of the lottery requirements, the charter school that receiving the CSP fund must use a lottery to enroll students. If more students apply, then there are seats available. Lotteries have to include all eligible applicants and must be random in nature. So we can't, do weighted lotteries. Those are not allowed. Can't do gender-based lotteries. So we can't say we're going to have a lottery for just girls or a lottery for just boys. It has to be all the eligible applicants, and it must be completely random in nature. You can use a wait list. So if you admit all the students that you have and you're going to put them on a wait list, you can use a wait list for that and then use your lotteries for admission as spots become available. There are some exemptions from lotteries that apply, and these can be found in the program guidelines. So there's some certain things like if a student was already enrolled on that campus, they could be exempt from a lottery. Or if a staff member, their student could attend there, they may be exempt from the lottery. So those exemptions can be found in our program guidelines, as well as more details around lottery requirements for admission. So after you complete your application, and in addition to submission your application, you will submit these attachments. So the first will be that federal definition of a charter school. You'll look through each one of those requirements, acknowledge that you are going to meet those, and sign that. You'll have your documentation of authorization to charter. So these are your board policies of how you're going to authorize for your charter, your board of trustees approval, narrative description from the superintendent, and then your attachment 5, which is your priority points for your subcharter. As your attachment 2, you'll also include in there your district charter agreement. So what are you and the charter, what is the district and the charter organization agreeing to the terms? All right, I'm going to pause right there for just a minute because we just went through the part of most of the application. Next, we're going to get into the budget piece of the application, but I wanted to pause for just a minute there if there were any questions before we dive into the budget. All right. We're going to keep going then. So now we're going to talk about our budget and use of funds. So we're going to dive into planning and implementation, allowable and unallowable uses of funds. So when developing your budget, you must meet this minimum threshold. So all the costs that are associated have to be determined to be necessary. So it's an item that is needed for the startup of the charter school. It must be reasonable. So would a reasonable person spend that amount of money on an item. So we don't want to spend, $10,000 on a new one single laptop. That's not necessarily a reasonable amount to spend on one item. It has to be allocable, so the cost being incurred specifically for the startup, and it's the cost proportional to the benefit that's going to be provided. So your cost benefit analysis there. And then allowable. Is the item allowed under this particular grant program? I will go ahead and name that the CSP grant allowable expenses are a little more restrictive than some other grants. So it's very important to pay attention to your program guidelines. And also we have a budget guide that we also posted on our TEA Grants Opportunity page that outlines the specific allowable expenses and when they're allowed in which which activity, planning versus implementation. So it's very important to review those and make sure that you completely understand allowable cost. And then if you have a question about an allowable cost, you can contact me or Nate. We're here to help and support and answer any questions that you have. So looking at our grant timelines, our CSP budget is divided into two parts. We have our planning and our implementation. So our planning activities are related to planning and program design of the educational program. So these activities usually take place before the first day that the campus starts serving students. Our planning activities cannot occur for more than 18 months. So you cannot be doing planning activities for longer than 18 months. With that, the expectation being that within those 18 months or before 18 months, the campus will have opened and started serving students. Our implementation activities are activities that are related to the implementation of the charter's educational program. So we've planned the program, we've done our program design as part of our planning activities. Now we're getting into the actual implementation of the charter's educational program. These are activities that usually occur between the first day of school, or the first day the campus begins serving students, and the grant's end date. So one thing to keep in mind is that your budgeted expenditures are tied to the type of activity and not necessarily when you're making the purchase. So example I want to use here is that, so my desk for students, I'm going to purchase those obviously before the first day of school because I need them in place so students have somewhere to sit on the first day of school. But those would be things that would be considered an implementation activity because I'm actually going to be using them as part of the implementation of the charter program. Having students in the seats, they're going to be used there as part of the implementation of the program, not part of the planning or program design. So while I'm purchasing them before school, they would be considered an implementation activity. So again, tied to the type of activity, and that's where they will be budgeted, not necessarily when the purchase is made. Again, that's where that budget guide that's posted with the application is really going to be helpful with your budgeting. So some activities are considered only planning activities, and some are considered only implementation activities, but there are some that are allowed as both. So just some examples of things that are only allowed as planning activities: salaries, contracted personnel, and rent. Again, there are additional restrictions around those, and we're going to talk about those in just a little bit. Implementation would be things like textbooks, technology and equipment, classroom furniture. Again, I'm going to purchase those before the first day of school, but they're considered implementation activities because they are used for implementation of the charter program. And then things like professional development and recruitment materials could be considered both, depending on when they're taking place and what their purpose is. So our planning activities, again, are tied to our planning, design, and educational program. So some things that could be included here is that planning activities would be things like refining your desired educational results and how you're going to measure those results. Could include professional development of teachers and other staff who are going to work in the charter school. So you've picked out your educational program. Now you got to train your staff up on how to deliver that educational program. That's considered part of that planning. So it's, again, the design of the educational program and your planning for that implementation. Our implementation activities, on the other hand, are tied to the actual implementation of the charter school itself. So informing the community about the school, getting that necessary equipment and educational materials, acquiring or developing your curriculum materials, and other initial operational costs. Those are things that could be considered implementation activities, because you're moving beyond the planning and program design, and now you're moving into actually implementing that educational program. So now we're going to take a closer look at allowable uses of funds. So for our planning activities, activities that are related to planning and design of the charter school's educational program, professional development training for teachers and staff, and special education support. So designing how your special education supports are going to look, looking at training your teachers to provide those special education supports. Those were things that would be allowed as part of planning activities. Salaries are allowed as part of planning activity. However, there are some caveats to that. So the only positions that are allowed to be paid using CSP funds are teachers, school leaders, and specialized instructional support staff. You can find the definition for specialized instructional support staff. You can find that in the program guidelines. Also, your salaries can only be paid for activities that are related to planning and not for ongoing operations. So for example, if I am going to train my teachers on my new curriculum, I could pay them, pay part of their salary for the time they are attending that planning, but not for when they're in the classroom teaching. That would be considered an ongoing operation. Payroll expenditures that are paid for with the CSP funds are only allowable, again, for the for the activities for planning or program design of that charter campus. And no payroll expenditures are allowed beyond the 30th calendar day after the campus begins serving students. So that's going to be an important day because it applies to our next two allowable expenses as well. Is once the campus begins serving students, 30 days after that, salaries are no longer allowed to be paid. Additionally, contracted personnel may no longer be paid from the grant 30 days after the campus begins serving students. And rent or occupancy costs for the school facility may also not be paid beyond 30 days after the campus begins serving students. So just to drive this point home, so during our planning phase, salaries and contracted personnel and rent are things that are allowed, but 30 days after the campus begins serving students, those things are no longer allowed. So salaries, contracted personnel, and rent may no longer be paid 30 days after the campus begins serving students. Now taking a look at our implementation activities. So some allowable costs for our implementation activities. One-time startup costs related to equipment. So desks, chairs, computers, equipment that's related to technology or PE and art. Even playground equipment may be purchased using the CSP funds as long as it's a one-time startup cost. Non-consumable supplies and materials, such as textbooks, library books, reading materials, and teaching materials. So these are things that can be purchased with CSP funds. I want to say that no subscription services are allowed. So I know that sometimes there's reading materials that are a subscription service. Since that is not a one-time cost, that is not something that is allowable. Subscriptions are not allowable using CSP funds. You can also pay for installation costs that are associated with the computers, the data systems, networks, and telephone systems. So you can buy the equipment and pay for the installation costs that are associated with that equipment. You can also use funds for a one-time startup cost associated with transportation. So you may not pay for a bus driver services, but you could pay for a one-time cost that's associated with transportation for students. We see some that buy like a van to provide transportation to students with IEPs. That would be an allowable cost, but the fuel that goes along with that or hiring someone to drive that van would not be an allowable expense. You may also spend funds on costs associated with necessary renovations on minor facility repairs. So if you have something that's necessary to the campus being able to operate, you may spend funds on that. However, I want to make sure to highlight that construction of any kind is not allowable under CSP grants. So we actually had a campus that asked, could we put an elevator in? It's like, no, that's considered construction. So that would be something that, while yes, we say that would be necessary, it's considered construction, so it's therefore not allowable. These are very minor facility repairs or necessary renovations that are very minor and don't involve construction. You may also use CSP funds to purchase financial management software and the training to go along with that software. You cannot pay for ongoing accountability services, but you may purchase the software and get training for your staff on that software. You can also purchase property insurance to cover equipment that was purchased with grant funds, so only the property insurance for that equipment. And then any other appropriate non-sustained costs that cannot be supported from other services could be paid for under CSP grants. Again, one-time startup cost, not something that's an ongoing expense. So when you're looking at your CSP grant, when you're looking at the budget, you're going to be dividing your grant funds into planning costs and implementation costs. So it's important to keep in mind what type of activity it's going to be tied to. Is it a planning activity for the planning and program design, or is it an implementation activity which is focused on the actual implementation of the charter program? So you're going to budget that accordingly. And your budget in your grant application is actually divided by each budget code where you have, we're going to put the actual activity and decide if it's a planning activity or an implementation activity. Again, the resources to support you on that are going to be your budget guide and then also your program guidelines. And then if you have questions, you can also reach out to myself or Nate, and we're happy to provide support. So again, I want to highlight here for everyone, the CSP grant supports the planning, program design, and initial implementation of our charter schools. These are costs that should be one-time costs that are not ongoing expenditures. So not something that's going to be repeated over and over. These are really one-time startup costs for our CSP grant. Again, as I mentioned before, the CSP grant is much more restrictive than some other grants. So it's very important to check your program guidelines and the budget guide to make sure that the cost that you're wanting to budget is allowable under CSP. So now let's talk about some unallowable uses of CSP funds. So field trips are not allowed under our CSP funds. Neither are hosting or sponsoring conferences or paying for advisory councils. The cost of membership into any organizations. Apparel is not allowed, so we can't pay for shirts with the new school's logo on it or the school's mission or vision or backpacks or anything like that. Not allowable under CSP. Salaries and contracted personnel beyond the first 30 days is not allowed. Debt services are not allowed under CSP. The rental and occupancy cost of the facility beyond the first 30 days is unallowable. Can't purchase or lease land or real estate with CSP funds. Construction or cosmetic renovations, so such as like painting the walls a different color or getting a nice artwork done on the wall. Those things are not allowed under CSP funds. Consumable instructional materials or supplies are not allowed. accounting and bookkeeping services, except for the purchase of that software, are not allowed. You can't pay for annual audit services out of the CSP grant. I know that that is required to have an annual audit service, but those services can't be paid for using CSP funds. They'll have to be paid for from a different funding source. Cannot pay for ongoing food service, other personal and liability insurance, interest on loans is not allowed, deposits of any kind, no religious instruction materials or insignia are allowed under CSP, and no extracurricular activities such as UIL, competitions, athletic programs. You can purchase equipment that is related to state required PE programs, but not for extracurricular activities from CSP. All right, so now we're going to do a little practice. So I'm going to have some scenarios up here, and then I'm going to ask at the end if it's an allowable CSP expense. And so if you could just put in the chat, so we'll be able to see there what everybody's responses are. So I'm going to put this one up for you. All right. So ABC Charter School wants to paint a mural in the cafeteria that includes the school's mission and vision. They have contracted with a local artist who will develop the design and create the mural. ABC Charter also plans to purchase t-shirts for the staff and water bottles for students that will include the design on the back. This will help create a sense of belonging on the campus and build culture. So is this an allowable CSP expenditure? Awesome. Yeah, lots of no's in the chat. I know. I saw Billy was immediately like, nope, nope. No, this is not allowed. So again, the painting of the mural, while that's nice and great, you know, it could be really beneficial. It's not something that's considered necessary renovations. It is considered cosmetic. So that would be something that is not allowable under CSP. You also can't purchase the apparel or the things that just have logos, promotional materials. So again, that is unallowable. So great job, everyone. All right, let's look at our next scenario. So ABC Charter contracts with XYZ Incorporated to create a monitoring tool for classroom walkthroughs, including high leverage look-fors and tools to craft and deliver effective feedback to teachers. Instead of the leadership team receiving training on how to utilize these resources, the team decides to contract with XYZ Incorporated to have a consultant visit the campus once or twice a month, conduct 10 walkthroughs, collect observation data, and provide feedback to teachers. The data is provided to the leadership team, who then develops teacher support plans based on the areas of concern. So this one's a little more complicated. So is this allowable? All right, seeing some responses come in. All right, so this one's a little bit more complicated. So yes, they can have XYZ come in and create the monitoring tool. They can have them come in and train them on the tool as long as it's not beyond the first 30 days. But since they are going to have them come in once a month, twice a month, and conduct the walkthroughs, then it becomes unallowable because it's a contracted service that's beyond the first 30 days. So if you want to have someone come in and help you develop a tool for monitoring, that's great. Then train your administrators on it. But the administrators need to take the reins from there and move forward with it, not having someone continue to come in, do the walkthroughs, collect the data, and provide them with that, because then that's beyond the first 30 days. Therefore, contracted services not allowed beyond 30 days. So that part would be unallowable. So that was a little more complicated. All right, let's take a look at the next one. ABC Charter plans to host an event at their facility to inform community members and parents about the school. For the event, they will print brochures in English and Spanish that will provide information about the school and include instructions for enrollment. They will purchase ad space in the local newspaper to invite the community to the event. The newspaper ad will also include instructions for enrollment. Since the meeting will be held around dinner time, they will purchase sandwich trays, chips, and sodas for the event. Is this an allowable CSP expense? Sorry about that. All right, so looking at this one, so they can pay for the brochures to be printed in English and Spanish. We definitely want them to host this community event. We want to get input and inform our community members and parents about the school. They can purchase the ad space in the local newspaper to invite the community, as long as it includes the instructions for enrollment. And the one thing that they cannot purchase is the sandwich trays, chips, and sodas for the event. So everything up until that point was great, but when they wanted to purchase the sandwich trays, chips, and sodas for the event, those cannot be purchased with CSP funds. And so, yes, so Billy, this would be at their facility, so they're going to have it at their facility. And so there's no expense for the facility. They're just going to have this session for them. They're going to advertise it to the community. All of that is fine. Just can't purchase the sandwich trays, chips, or sodas for the event. No food with CSP funds. Okay, last practice. ABC Charter used CSP funds to purchase a new curriculum for the campus that specifically addresses the needs of the student population, which were identified by the needs assessments conducted by the district. To make sure that the curriculum is implemented with fidelity, CSP funds will be used to pay for a 3-day boot camp to train teachers and instructional support staff on the curriculum and effective instructional strategies to accelerate learning. Is this an allowable CSP expense? All right, seeing lots of yeses in the chat, and that is correct. Yes, this is an allowable CSP expense. They can purchase the new curriculum for their campus as long as it's going to address the specific needs of their student population. And then they can also host their 3-day boot camp to train their teachers and their instructional support staff on the curriculum and effective instructional strategies. So bringing in that professional development for the teachers is definitely an allowable expense for our CSP grantees. This would be something that would be considered part of your planning for your program design. So as you're going through your grant application, you want to make sure that you are looking at the 2 resources here. Your program guidelines is going to have all the details you need about allowable and unallowable expenses, and then also your planning and implementation guidance. So in that one, it's a more thorough guide that provides what is an allowable expense and in which type of activity it's allowable, whether it be planning or implementation. You can also submit questions to us. We're happy to provide support if you have questions about what an allowable activity, what type of allowable activity would be. We're happy to provide that guidance as well. All right, so now that we've gone through the application itself, talked through our allowable and unallowable expenses, now let's talk about how each application is going to be reviewed and scored and how priority points will be assigned. So for your standard review criteria, you can receive 10 points for addressing your needs and identifying your plan for addressing those needs. Your measurable goals and progress are worth 10 points. Your project evaluation and modification is worth 5 points. Your statutory and program requirements, that's all those narrative questions that we go through, are 25 points. And then the budget itself is worth 10 points for a total of 60 points. Additionally, you will receive specific review criteria around the SMART goal. Specifically, that will be scored to determine if it aligns to the needs that are being addressed and the measurable progress sections, and making sure that your SMART goals and benchmarks are associated with measurable progress must be able to meet or achieve that goal during the grant period. So making sure that your benchmarks and your SMART goals are aligned and that your SMART goal is aligned to the needs that you identified as a quantifiable need and that plan of how you're going to address it. So making sure everything's aligned and makes sense. So for our standard review criteria, that gives us a total of 70 points. So grant applications that receive at least 70% of the 70 points, so a total of 49 points, prior to priority points can be considered for funding, and those that receive the 49 points are then considered for priority points. So subchapter C priority points are based on 4 different areas. So the strength of the district authorizing practices, so looking at that district charter agreement, your board policies, those kinds of things, looking at your authorization practices for your 10 points. We also take into account here if you are an 1882 school and if you've attended TALA. We're going to talk a little bit about TALA in just a few minutes. We look at the strength of the operator, so looking at the educational program design, success that they've had, so the strength of the operator is 15 points. Strength and need of community demand, so are you going to be serving a high population of students that would normally attend a D or F school? And then if the charter schools are going to open in a qualified opportunity zone. All of these things can earn you priority points, which are then added to your standard review criteria to get a potential total of 110 points. Again, all of this can also still be found in the program guidelines at the end. We have the review criteria and the scoring as part of our program guidelines. So grant awards are made starting with the highest scoring application and then continuing to the next highest until the funds are exhausted. So we start with whoever got the most points, second most points, third most points, all the way through until we either exhaust all of the funds or there are no more applicants that meet that minimum percentage score or higher. So we either exhaust all the funds or we get to the point where people applications are not meeting the minimum score anymore. That's how funding is awarded. So getting those priority points really makes a difference sometimes. All right, so let's take a look at some next steps. So as I mentioned before, we are going to hold application office hours. One's going to be held on January 9th of 2024 at 10:30 a.m. And then the second one's going to be held January 11th, 2024 at 2:30 p.m. I believe Nate's going to put those links in the chat so you can register for those office hours. They are completely optional. And you can come and go as needed. We'll be on the line for about an hour. And so we'll be there to help with any questions that you have. You can pop on for just 1 or 2 questions or just pop on and listen to other ones. It's completely up to you. You can also find those links for registration in the program guidelines. The last day to submit questions that will be included in our FAQ is going to be January 10th. You can submit those through our charter schools inbox, and we're going to put that up at the very end of our presentation today. And then the FAQs will be posted on the TEA grants opportunity on January 12th of 2024. So you can go and review those, give you plenty of time to look over those before you submit your final application to us. Also want to take a minute to plug our TALA. This is our Texas Authorizers Leadership Academy. They are holding an information session on January 10th of 2024 at 12 noon. There's a registration link there for you. I believe Nate just put it in the chat for you as well. This is a great opportunity to come and learn more about TALA. TALA is a great opportunity for our district charter authorizers to come and learn about best practices for authorizing with the development of that charter agreement, but then even with measuring performance, going through renewals, all of those things. So it's really great opportunity. I encourage you to come and learn more at our information session, and maybe you'll be interested in attending our TALA session. So it's I went through it. It's a great opportunity. I learned a lot. And it's also a great way to network with others who are going through the same process of authorization. So our application due date, this application is going to be due January 22nd, 2024. You will submit it via email to competitivegrants@teatexas.gov. Do not email it to me directly. It has to go through Competitive Grants. That's how they determine if it has been received in the correct amount of time. It has to be submitted before midnight of the 22nd. So it has to be submitted by 11:59 p.m. on January 22nd. So again, make sure you email the application and all of the required attachments to competitivegrants@tea.texas.gov. Again, just a reminder that our grant period is going to go from April 1st of 2024. So that will be the official grant start date. And then our grant end date is going to be September 30th of 2025. And so just really wanted to highlight that there. So as you're planning for your application, keeping these dates in mind as you're looking at your benchmarks, as you're looking at your uses of funds, your plans activity, that these will be the grant start dates to consider as you are creating and writing your application. All right, so as I mentioned before with your FAQs have to be submitted by January 10th of 2024 by 5 o'clock, and you can submit those to charterschools@tea.texas.gov. And those will be submitted in writing to us. We'll get those answered and included in the FAQs. And the FAQ will be posted on the website no later than January 12th of 2024. All right, well, thank you everyone for coming. It was great seeing everyone here today. If you have questions, feel free to reach out, and I look forward to seeing your applications.